Hello and welcome. My name is Danielle Carron, and I want to share with you an integrative model of health as well as healing that I came up with. All of this comes from a lot of my training and experience. I've been trained in contemplative psychotherapy. I have a master's in holistic nutrition. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, been trained in internal family systems, level 1, level 2, and there's one called internal family systems and spirituality. I have training in functional neurology. I've had training in various types of spiritual teachings and have trained with various shamans. And so I definitely see the multi-dimensionality of our health. I think that we have many different systems here that we're going to get into that are operating and communicating together. And so we can't go ahead and just isolate aspects of our health because they are integrative, they are connected. And so we're going to take a look at that today. I also want to share with you that I teach a course called Raising Resilient Children because I'm very passionate about getting children at a very young age the tools that they need, and for parents to understand the needs that need to be met, the love and support and care in order to really receive what they need for optimal health. And so we're going to look at this first model, which is about optimal health. And then the second model would be one that looks at when we've had ruptures in these areas of health, when we've had trauma or abuse, or we didn't get our needs met, we didn't get the love and attention and care that we needed. And so those would be areas that we would need to heal. So we'll look at that. All right, so let's look at here the integrative model of health and what we have. At the center, we have our core self, is what I call it. I draw it as the sun because I believe it's always shining, always available. This is when we feel most like ourselves. When we're here and we're accessing this, we're in the present moment. We're inherently connected to ourselves, our bodies, and something bigger. So you see this bigger yellow oval here. That's to represent whatever word you want to use: source, divine, God, the creator, or the universe, which I believe is in us and all around us. Like the space that we experience is not empty, but it's actually alive and awake. And so again, when we're in our core self, we're inherently connected to something bigger. We're inherently regulated, which means that we're feeling at home in our bodies. We're inherently resourced. We have what we need when we're here, and we're inherently resilient. And my definition of resilience is that it's something that's already wired in. It's part of the divine design. We don't need to build it up or make it stronger. It's more of a matter of how much access do we have to it. It is an aspect that is fearless, meaning it can be with our greatest fear and it can be with our greatest pain. It is also a form of true power, meaning it doesn't need to push through anything, judge, criticize, avoid anything, because it's truly empowered. So it doesn't need to fear something, and therefore it doesn't need to push, judge, or avoid, control, coerce, or anything like that. So this is our core self. And like I said, it's always available, it's always shining. And that's at the center of the model. And then we're going to look at these different aspects of health. So we have the physical and sexual, we have the physiological, psychological, emotional, the biochemical and nutritional, the relational, as well as the spiritual and the energetic. So first, let's take a look at the physical and sexual aspect of our health and what it would look like in ideal health. For one, we would have healthy boundaries. We'd be taught what our boundaries are and how to respect them. We'd have other people who are raising us respecting our boundaries. And we have boundaries that are not only physical and sexual, but we also have boundaries that are around all of our senses. For example, somebody can yell in our ear and that would be violating that boundary, our hearing sense. We have boundaries around thoughts and our emotions, around time, around people and animals that we care about. We have spiritual and religious boundaries. So there are many different kinds of boundaries. We want to know how to advocate for our boundaries and also how to repair if people cross our boundaries. And so when this is encouraged, we end up learning how to respect our own boundaries and other people's boundaries. And then another aspect of the physical and sexual is to love and accept our body. So when we're raised with people who are giving us that message that we are beautiful and our bodies are loved and accepted, we're being taken care of, we're given the room to explore our body in the way that we want to, and we're encouraged to have our own style, that kind of thing, then we can grow up and learn to love and accept our body. And when we do that, we can also listen to and trust our body, and we take care of this vessel that we're in. And so what we want here in ideal health is to be taught that our body has wisdom and to listen to what it's telling us. For example, we listen to when it's hungry, when we want to sleep, and when we want to rest. We trust in our body's ability to repair itself and heal, that our bodies are naturally oriented to heal and repair. We learn to listen to the signs and symptoms of our body, in that there's something off and something's not right. And we learn to know what intuition feels like in our body. We can advocate for our body when something doesn't feel right. We take care of our needs, and we give our body love, respect, nutrition, rest. We allow our bodies to play and have fun. And so that's a lot of examples of taking care of our body, trusting our body, listening to it. And lastly, we have the positive and pleasurable connection to our sexuality. When we're taught to respect our body and our boundaries, we'll naturally be more inclined to have positive and pleasurable relationship with our body and sexuality. We can explore with pleasure. We tend to attract people who are respectful of our bodies and our boundaries. And we're present in our body, so we can experience it with more pleasure. That's the physical and the sexual. Next, we're going to look at the physiological. So the physiological is thinking about the nervous system. What I want you to imagine is that we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is like the gas on your car. It's the energy, the drive, and the go. The parasympathetic is more like the rest and digest and relax. And so we want to have this nice rhythm in our nervous system of gas and brake. And when we're healthy physiologically, we know how to regulate ourselves. We know how to regulate what's happening in our body and our emotions. And so we're taught how to use our awareness to regulate our body. For example, one would be, can you find a relaxed place in your body and focus your attention there and notice what happens? And this then can lead to our ability to shift our internal physiology. Another aspect of the physiological is our healthy attachment system. And that's when we're receiving love and support and co-regulation and attunement. We tend to bond in secure ways to others. And then when we have that healthy attachment, we have easier working relationships. We can work through ruptures and conflict easier. And so the needs of our attachment system are getting met here. And then we're able to co-regulate. So that means when we're in a place of anxiety or stress, pain or conflict, that another person is feeling more calm in their body. And so they can come and be around us and help us regulate. That's called co-regulation. Their coherence in their nervous system, the calmness in their nervous system can bring coherence and calm to another person. It's very much how a mother would regulate her baby. Just by holding the baby near her, the baby can feel that regulation and also start to calm down as well. That's co-regulation. And when the physiological system is healthy, we feel at home in our body. We tend to feel like that regulated state more often than not. And we can trust our body's wisdom. We feel at home in our body, and so therefore we can listen to it and trust it. When we feel an emotion, we can allow it to move through us and allow for what naturally wants to happen. We make space and time for our body to release things naturally. And then we have learned to prevent and heal from trauma. There are ways to prevent trauma, and then there's also ways to heal from it. And when we're supported by others who can help us learn these things, we can move through life with greater confidence and ease. Now let's look at the psychological system in health. In health, we understand the wisdom behind the way our mind works, the way our psyche works. We're not pathologizing it because we understand that there's a lot of wisdom there. Our psyche is oriented toward protecting us from pain. And when we look at it that way, we can see that there's wisdom in all of our coping strategies and defense mechanisms. We have many parts that are fierce and loyal at protecting us from pain. And it's important to discern that from how they're going about protecting us, because that might actually not be helpful or could even be destructive. But there's always a positive intention underneath that. The psychological part here, I draw out as a cloud. So when the coping mechanisms are present, they are clouding out the sun, and we have less access to our core self here. And we understand that we have conditioning to work through, and as we work through it, we have greater authenticity. We're empowered to feel more like ourselves as we work through our pain and conditioning. And we have greater access to this core self, like I said. When we get the right tools and support, we have more of an internal peace and quiet mind. We have more harmony inside, and we're not going to war with ourselves and others. We don't have the need to judge others and control others or avoid anything, because like I said, we have more access to our core self if we have less of these. What I'm calling these would be like protective parts, coping mechanisms, defense strategies. And when we have more access here, we feel our resilience, and we don't need to use things like coercion, control, avoiding, things like that. And we know how to work with fear in the subconscious mind. When we understand what fear is, we can both honor it and separate from it. So these parts here, their main emotion is fear. Those are the protective parts, the coping strategies, defense mechanisms. And so when we understand how to separate from it, then it doesn't need to control us, doesn't need to drive us around. Who would you be if you weren't driven around by fear? And the subconscious mind is driving us around 95% of our lives. So we want to know and understand how to work with the subconscious mind. Bruce Lipton talks a lot about the subconscious mind, and he would say, if you want to know what's programmed and conditioned into your subconscious mind, just take a look around at your life. The external is going to show you what's in there. And so we want to know how to go ahead and work with and reprogram the subconscious mind to be more aligned with our core self. Now let's look at the emotional aspect of our health. When we're in health, we have a healthy sense of self-confidence, self-worth, self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-respect. How do we get all of these? Well, mostly when we're raised by people who have these and feel this way about themselves. So you can't have a child and expect them to have self-compassion when the parent doesn't have compassion for themselves. So that really helps when we are able to be raised by people who have a healthy sense of these things. And when our emotional needs are being met. I refer to our emotional needs as essential nutrients because I think that they're just as essential as nutrients in food. So these would be things like being protected, feeling seen and heard, being respected, feeling accepted, receiving love, support, affection, and safety. And when our emotional needs are met, we know how to treat ourselves and others in those ways. And we also know how to work with emotions and allow them to be felt and experienced. So we've been taught how to not be afraid of the feelings, to let them move through, to know that they're time limited when we allow them to move through us. We're trusting our body and its wisdom. The body's wanting to move this emotion through. I often say, like, the emotions are like energy. They want to move. So let that energy move through your body and trust your body. We give and receive emotional repairs with others. No child expects perfection. They allow for human imperfections because that's reality. However, when there's a rupture that happens in the relationship, giving and receiving repairs is healing and honoring. It allows for safety and trust to be restored. It's easier to forgive and move forward. And you can help another person co-regulate with repair. So for example, you might say, I'm sorry that I yelled at you this morning. That must have been really scary. I love you and I don't want to scare you. That wasn't your fault. I was angry at this other thing. And in the future, I'm going to be more mindful of my feelings so they don't come out at you. That's an example of a repair. Another aspect of our emotional health is feeling a sense of love and belonging. So being brought up in a family where we are receiving love and belonging helps us feel more loved and belonging in the greater world. And we start to internalize that we are worthy of love and belonging. Lastly, in this category of emotional health, we have inherent goodness. We're innately good people, and when this is reflected back to us, we internalize that and recognize it as truth. We have good intentions. It is inevitable that we're going to hurt and disappoint other people. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that we're bad. So learning that we're inherently good is very important for emotional health, and that we're deserving of respect and appreciation. Next, we're going to look at the relational aspect of our health. So relational, meaning our relationship to ourselves, to our bodies, to other people, to the greater source, God. All of those are interconnected. Early on, if we learn that it's safe to be, explore, and express our unique self, that really improves our health in the relational field. And when others trust in us and model trusting and listening to our body and intuition, we have a greater ability to trust ourselves. We trust that others are mostly reliable and know how to discern who isn't. That's an important one. So we can see that most people are good and they have good intentions. So we don't have to move about the world suspicious of other people. Yet we know the signs of someone who could be threatening, dangerous, self-centered, or deceptive. It's easier to discern when we've been raised by people who have good boundaries, have integrity, and we're taught to trust our gut and not override ourselves. Our ability to give and receive comfort and co-regulation during times of suffering, feeling scared or vulnerable or in a conflict is also really helpful. When we can turn toward another and that other person is actually supportive and comforting and loving, that really helps us bond with people and trust other people and develop safety. Another part here of the relational health is attunement to self and others. So when other people have attuned to us and they're sensitive to our needs and what we might be feeling. So for example, when you are talking with somebody and they're starting to get upset, you might pause and check in and see if they need anything and not just ignore them, for example. That's attunement. Empathy and curiosity, these are so important. To be empathetic is to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes It really helps them feel validated, seen, and heard, which creates more safety, trust, and closeness in the relationship. And curiosity shows an interest to get to know the other person as separate from yourself and not just assume that they're like you or they want the things that you want. It shows that you want to know them as different, and what makes them unique. It's an invitation for the other person to share more about themselves. And lastly, in this category, we have mutual power with others. So in a healthy relational dynamic, we can share power. I can be powerful and you can be powerful, and we can have a great relationship. Neither one of us have to have power over the other person. And this is really honoring of both people. It's about understanding each other and learning to negotiate and find solutions together. It's about collaboration. Another aspect of our health is the biochemical and nutritional. This is looking at when we're taught that there's a connection between what we eat, substances and toxins, and our health and our body. That's important that we know that these are all connected, because then we can take better care of ourselves. We can take responsibility for our health and the symptoms that we encounter from more of an integrative perspective. And that allows us for feeling more empowered about our health. When we're taught to listen to and trust our bodies, we can understand more about what our body's trying to tell us if there's symptoms and signs to listen to. I wish all health practitioners took this kind of approach of deferring to one's own knowledge and wisdom of their body, that health can be a collaborative process, that we don't need to override our own boundaries to get support. When we have signs and symptoms that our body is trying to communicate to us, we can listen to them and we can feel like something's off and trust that the body is naturally trying to move itself in the direction of health and well-being. So what does it look like to have a healthy relationship here is taking care of ourselves with eating well, drinking water, having good hygiene, getting good sleep, all the self-care practices. And the last aspect of our health here on this integrative health model is our spiritual and energetic health. Here we have an understanding and faith in our spiritual nature. And why is that important? Well, when we're connected to something bigger here, then we are feeling like we have more resource, more support, maybe even some guidance, that we're not alone. We can make meaning out of life and what life brings to us. And so we have a greater sense of the interconnectedness of life, and perhaps a perspective on life of beauty and wonder. Many people can connect to this when they're in nature. Nature seems to bring out our own authentic nature. And so when we're supported in connecting to something bigger, it tends to be a big resource in our lives and helps us navigate life's hardships. My spiritual perspective came from a near-death experience, which you can read about more on my website. It profoundly impacted me in a positive way. And I do believe that we are a unique expression here of the divine. And I think that if we saw each other like that, we may treat ourselves and others with greater love, compassion, and understanding. It appears that the various ways that we can separate ourselves, meaning if we feel separate from the divine or God, or we feel separate from our core self, and we are stuck in like one of these psychological defense mechanisms, or we're stuck in pain over here, then that usually seems to be a cause of suffering whenever we separate or get separated. So when we come back into connection with ourselves, our bodies, the greater energy here that surrounds us, we seem to be in greater health. I've noticed that people who don't believe in anything bigger or don't believe in anything after death, they seem to have more anxiety in life. So it's great if we're supported in connecting to a greater source of, let's say, God, creator, universe, whatever word that you want to use for that. It's really, that's an individual thing. Whatever your relationship is to the one, God, I really support people in connecting to what most resonates with them. Also in this category, I have a trust in our intuition. So what quantum physics and field dynamics is showing now is that all information is in the field, meaning the space is not empty, that there's information there, and that we can tap into that information. And I think that comes to us in what we call intuition. And when we can tap into our intuition, it can very much save our lives. It can also be a source of inspiration. And what we are hearing now from quantum physics and field dynamics is that even the smallest particle of our body, the atom, is made up of 99.99% space. So actually, we're mostly space, even though we feel like we're mostly matter. What morphic fields are showing is that there's a kind of a field around our body, and that very much informs the health of our body, the material makeup of our body, and that they would say that if there's a disruption in the field, it happens there first before it becomes something physical in our body, like an illness or disease or something like that. So there's an energy force in us and all around us. And if we can tap into that, that really helps us feel supported and interconnected with a greater source and resource in life. Now we're going to take a look at an integrative model of healing. This is looking at when there's been disruptions in our health through trauma, abuse, not getting needs met, not feeling loved and cared for, being neglected, or not getting the tools that we need to take care of ourselves. So again, we're going to look at the physical and sexual aspect of our health and what can disrupt it. So boundary ruptures, what are those? Well, we went over all the types of boundaries in the first model. And so this is when somebody can cross your boundary, threaten your boundary, violate your boundary. That can happen through physical and sexual abuse, physical injuries or accidents. We can also receive negative messages about our body and our sexuality. And that can happen by someone shaming any part of our body, being criticized or judged for parts of our body or our looks, when people compare our body to others, when people comment about our weight, our hair, or our clothes, when our natural exploration of sexuality is shamed or shunned, when there's sexual abuse, that can cause all sorts of negative and distorted beliefs about our body and sexuality. So the body can become the enemy, and then we can abandon it and disconnect from it. If we've experienced trauma or we felt dysregulated in our body, meaning we don't feel at home in our body, we don't feel calm in our body, then we can turn against our body. We may try to disconnect from it. We may use substances to numb out from it. Certainly if someone was abused, we can turn against the body. And at the extreme, we can experience dissociation, where we pretty much numb out the body, or we don't remember being in our body. It's common for many people to actually treat things like their car and other objects better than their body. So we can also have a distorted connection to our sexuality. This can arise from, again, sexual abuse or physical abuse. For example, we can shut down all sexual feelings and arousal. We can associate sexual feelings with shame or pain. We can disconnect from our body or use substances to be able to participate in sexual experiences. We can seek out dangerous or risky behaviors, or we simply may have no boundaries at all when it comes to sexual behavior. What's happening here is a lack of respect and self-care for our physical needs and desires. Next, let's take a look at the psychological aspect of our health and what can disrupt that. So we can have fear of our emotional pain. So the emotional pain is over here, and we're going to get into that more. And then the fear is these parts here that are the clouds. The clouds are afraid of the emotional pain. And when we don't know how to work with these parts or aspects of ourselves, then we can very much be controlled and driven around by our fear and our pain. And so we have a lack of understanding on how to work with our coping mechanisms and our defenses in response to pain. No one's taught us how to do that. And now we're stuck in the pain and the fear. Common coping mechanisms here would be things like anger, anxiety, hypervigilance, perfectionism, caretaking, inner critic, inner judge, substance abuse, eating disorders, suicidal parts, intellectual parts, and even parts that are like distracting or making us kind of foggy. Those are all what we're calling defensive mechanisms. They're also called protector parts. When we're stuck here in these parts, we don't know and we don't trust the core self or source. So we're stuck here. We don't really connect here to the core self or to the greater source. We can end up using control, coercion, criticism, and avoidance to feel power. Again, that's meaning we're stuck here in these cloud protective parts. And when we're mostly here in these parts, what ends up happening is that we're going to war with ourselves and other people. So we'll have a part over here that's doing something, and then this part's going to criticize it and judge it. So that's our inner war. And whenever we have inner war, we're going to project that out into the world. We're going to go to war with other people as well. Another thing to think about is when we want to change something in our lives, are we going to war with ourselves? Or are we changing from a place of love, acceptance, and compassion? If we go to war with ourselves and then we end up making that change in life, we've just proven to ourselves that war works. And again, that's going to get projected out into the world as war is an answer to solving problems. Next, let's look at the physiological aspect of our health and what can disrupt it. Remember, we were talking about the physiological is like our nervous system. It is our nervous system. It's the gas and the brake in our nervous system. And so what can disrupt it? Well, trauma from real or perceived threats to our well-being can disrupt it, because when we're under threat, whether it's real or perceived, we have impulses to fight, flight, or freeze. And we're wired to survive. And so we're going to elicit these impulses to move through to protect us. But we're not wired to feel defeated. And so if we do end up feeling defeated, it's kind of like an incomplete impulse, meaning like something didn't get to move through to completion where we actually feel like we are strong and can protect ourselves. And so what we want to do to help people heal here is to complete the incomplete defensive responses, to have all the options back on board to fight, flight, and freeze in the future. We can, for example, if we've endured childhood abuse, oftentimes we default on a freeze because we're too little to fight back. We can't run away because we're dependent, so we end up freezing. And then in future threats to our well-being, we can default on a freeze, and then we no longer have access to that fight and flight. And those are really important to our health and well-being. So we want to restore access to all the options through our healing. Again, we can have boundary ruptures that are going to impact our nervous system and throw off the regulation. And we need to heal those boundary ruptures in order to come back into regulation. Unhealed boundary ruptures can go to extremes, meaning we can very much be hyper vigilant about our boundaries, or we can have no boundaries at all. And so oftentimes when there's ruptures and there's trauma and things like that, we tend to go to these extremes, one or the other. We're trying to find the middle again, and that's in the healing. Physiologically, we can have a lack of co-regulation or attunement. And when that's not there, what happens is we tend to overly become independent, say, I'm just going to take care of it on my own and do it myself. And we become more isolated, meaning we don't trust in other people or in other people to show up and support us. So we want to then go ahead and heal that kind of attachment and regulation in the nervous system so that we can come back into secure attachment and feel more trust and safety with other people. So what we're talking about here in general is nervous system dysregulation. That's when we're jamming on the gas or we're jamming on the brakes, and that never feels good. It's not comfortable to be in that situation, just like it's not comfortable to be in someone's car when they're jamming on the gas and the brake. So we want to come back into like a nice easeful stepping on the gas and on the brake where it feels like a nice smooth ride. And I like to call the zone that we're looking for with the nervous system is the Goldilocks just right zone. It's not too much gas and it's not too much brake. And when we're in that Goldilocks zone, then we feel at home in our body and life feels manageable. So that's what we're looking for there. When we have that nervous system dysregulation, we can end up with an addiction to substances or different kinds of behaviors that would attempt to regulate ourselves. Also, when we're not taught to regulate our body with our own awareness, which means we can regulate wherever we are, then we are reaching for things outside of ourselves. We're dependent on things outside of ourselves. And then we can also become addicted to things outside of ourselves. So that's the physiological aspect of our health and how it can get impaired. Now we're going to take a look at the emotional aspect of our health and how that can be affected. And so I want you to look at this little stick figure in a bubble here. This part here is in a bubble in a circle because it's stuck in time. And this part is reliving pain, trauma, and vulnerability. So what happens is when we have emotional pain, we end up trying to compartmentalize it, stick it in a bubble, lock it away, exile it. And what part generally does that is these protectors, the clouds here, they end up locking this part away. Again, they carry fear. They're afraid of this emotional pain. They don't want you to have to feel it ever again. So they're going to do their very best to make sure that this is locked in the trunk. And so what are we talking about here with this emotional pain? This is coming from any kind of trauma, abuse, neglect. We can be impacted by others' unhealed trauma and conditioning that can be passed down through our parents, through the generations. We have a lack of essential nutrients. Remember, those are our emotional needs not being met. Any of those, we can end up with pain, trauma, and vulnerability that this part is stuck in time reliving. And what this part can also be carrying is subconscious burdens, meaning like beliefs and messages that aren't true about themselves, but they're actually carrying them around as if they were. And common feelings for this part would be to feel powerless, defenseless, helpless, scared, terrified, ashamed, shame, rejection, alone, abandoned, unworthy, unlovable, unsafe, wrong, defective. Those are common feelings here for this part. And when we have a lack of emotional repairs with others, so again, we can get hurt, but and people don't need to be perfect, like I said, but if there's a repair, then this part doesn't need to get stuck in time. You can actually help somebody heal this in the moment or shortly thereafter. So what's happening here is this person is not getting the emotional repairs with others. So they're forming more of these parts, and therefore they have now more psychological burden, more coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms. And the more parts we have, then the less access we have to our core self. The emotional impact can come from a lack of love and belonging as well. So one analogy I like to give is that we want our core self here in the driver's seat in your car, driving the path of your life. We have these protector parts here, the coping mechanisms in the back seat. They're going to look through the windshield through the lens of the past. If they feel like you're not listening, if they feel like they can't trust you, they're going to jump in the driver's seat and take over. And that's what leads people to feel like they're not themselves. They don't feel like themselves. They don't know how to handle these parts. They're being driven around by these parts. The exiles are these parts that are stuck in time. They are basically, you can think of them as like being stuck in the trunk. They're not going to be able to subtly get your attention because these protector parts will jump in very quickly and lock them away again. So what does that mean? They need to come through with intensity. They will come through with intense feelings, emotions, flashbacks, nightmares, and even physical illness or disease. The wisdom in that is that if they can get your attention, they can get your attention here, your core self. They have an opportunity to heal. They can move through time. We want to try to get this part to move through time, to feel a sense of resolution or completion. And they no longer need to stay stuck in the past, reliving that pain. Next, let's take a look at relational ruptures. What can happen relationally? So relationally, we are in relationship with ourselves, our bodies, others, and the whole source, God, divine, whatever word you want to use for that. So what can impact that? Well, a lack of safety to be, explore, and express our unique self. That happens from a lack of connection and trust to our bodies, a lack of regulation and co-regulation and attachment. All of these things that we're talking about, lack of repair. And then what can happen is we are shamed, blamed, judged, or criticized. We can often internalize those judgments, start to believe them about ourselves. We can have a lack of people available to provide comfort and co-regulation when we're suffering, scared, or in conflict, which can lead to more isolation. Again, we become more overly independent and we don't trust others, we don't open up to others, and we may not want to be in relationship with other people. What can happen here too when we experience some kind of suffering is that no one is there to welcome us back into a community. When you think about Indigenous cultures, they very much understand this and how important it is, because they will often send their young folks away for initiation. And that's something that would be painful, hard, challenging, maybe scary in some way. And they are welcomed back from that experience in a community, and they're appreciated and they're celebrated and they get to tell their stories. And this helps them integrate and heal from whatever it is, and also reap the benefits or the gifts from what they just went through. So it's a very wholesome experience to allow for growth and transformation. We tend to not have very much community when we've gone through our own pain, suffering, and trauma to come back to and support us and welcome us back into our communities. Another aspect of relational rupture is power over relationships, power over dynamics, power differentials. When somebody needs to have power over another person, they're trying to overcompensate for some weakness inside of themselves. Similarly, when someone allows someone to power over them, they most likely are also feeling weak. And this can be a lose-lose type of dynamic. It can often flip-flop where one person is the perpetrator, the other person is the victim, and now that flips. And so they're kind of stuck in this power differential dynamic. And what we need to overcome that is boundaries and understanding that the parts that are taking over are not acting from the core self here. We need to come back into our core self, our true power, and not get caught up in being the perpetrator, the victim, or be subject to these power over relationships. Next, let's look at the biochemical and the nutritional aspect of our health and what can happen here. So ongoing stress and trauma depletes our nutrients and impacts our biochemistry. So when we have ongoing stress, our own neurotransmitters like serotonin can be depleted. We deplete vital nutrients that we need in our body with ongoing stress. If we have trauma that's unhealed, that's going to create ongoing stress. A lot of people have ongoing stress in their work or their relationships. We're not wired to have ongoing stress going on in our body. Animals, if you look at them, they have time limited stress responses. So when a prey animal is being chased, they're feeling stress, and as well as the predators feeling stress by chasing them. But once that's over, their nervous system resets and they're not experiencing stress anymore. So that's really how we're designed as well, to have a short time limited stress response. And as we know, stress is one of the biggest factors in illness and disease. So we definitely want to look at how do we decrease stress levels, how do we regulate our nervous system so that we're not having ongoing stress, or the sympathetic, or the what we're saying is the gas on the car on all the time. What can happen here too is that we can lose our power by getting disconnected from our body, not taking care of our body, not trusting our body, and we start to give our power away to doctors and chemicals to fix us. And when we aren't thinking about how did we treat our body up until that point that we're now needing someone else to take care of it. We need to look at things like, did we love our body, and did we speak kindly and lovingly toward our body? Did we take care of it with good food and hydration, and get good sleep, and take care of our relationships again so we're not in ongoing stress? Do we do things that we love and enjoy? So these are all factors that bring us back into more empowerment and greater responsibility for our health. What can happen here is that we have a lack of understanding of how our food, substances, and toxins impact our body and our health. We're not connecting that the way we think, the way we feel, the way we regulate our emotions, our relationships, our connection spiritually can impact our health. So we want to bring that back into connection and understand that everything is interconnected, everything is operating and communicating together. And so the signs and symptoms in our bodies are a wake up to come back to connecting to our body, listening to it, trying to understand what it's needing in order to come back into health, because it's naturally designed to repair and heal. What can happen here is just a lack of self-care, and how we heal that is to come back into greater self-care practices. Lastly, let's look at the spiritual and energetic component of our health and what can get disrupted here. So we can have religious or spiritual trauma, and that can lead to a loss of power. It can lead to disconnection from source, God, the divine. And that can happen from anybody in a position of power, authority figures, figures in the religious communities. And they can do things or say things that can lead to us feeling disconnected. They can say that we're bad, we're a sinner, we're unworthy, we're alone, we're undeserving, for example. And that can lead to a disconnection from this bigger source. That's an assault on our true essence, our true nature, which I believe is we're always connected to this bigger source. But the disconnection from it very much can cause suffering. I think any kind of disconnection causes suffering. Like we talked about here, these parts that get locked away, they are suffering. They do need help from our core self to heal. And so I very much see my work is helping people weave back up the parts that got disconnected to the core self to source. And that definitely I've seen brings health and healing and a sense of feeling interconnected and supported. And so another thing here in the spiritual and energetic is the fear of death. I have found that many people who don't think that there's anything that happens after death will experience a lot more anxiety in life and a lack of trust in our intuition. So this can be detrimental to our survival because our intuition can keep us alive. And many times I'm helping people restore their trust in their intuition. And there are many examples of people who have dismissed or overrode their intuition, which led to them getting into a dangerous or bad situation. We can also experience dissociation or soul loss. And well, some people would say that that's the same thing. Dissociation is soul loss, and we're not feeling as whole as we can feel. And this disrupts our health when we become split off, and it causes suffering. So we do want to heal these parts, integrate the parts, weave them all back together so they're all connected. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for listening and watching. If you want more information, please visit my website, which is daniellecarron.com. That's DANIELLECARRON.com. Thank you.